Let's jump right into this explainer and look at a highly practical roadmap for migrating your CAPTCHA solver, all without jeopardizing your live production traffic. If you're managing high-volume automation, you already know that your CAPTCHA solving pipeline is literally the heartbeat of your entire workflow. So when you decide to evaluate a new provider, the absolute last thing you want is a messy transition that breaks your live systems. Today, we're breaking down the migration from Anti-Captcha to CaptchaAI. We are going to look at exactly why teams make this comparison, and more importantly, walk through the exact checklist you need to execute the switch safely. I want to kick things off by reassuring all the developers watching, switching CAPTCHA providers does not mean rebuilding your entire workflow from scratch. The foundational control flow you're already using, where you submit a task, pull for the result, and apply the token, that stays exactly the same. It's kind of like keeping your existing furniture but moving it into a new, maybe slightly more efficient house. Your core logic remains totally intact. We're essentially just updating the address and the language we use to communicate. All right, here's our game plan for today. We'll start with a case for switching. Look at the core API differences, dive into a practical migration checklist, point out some common mistakes to dodge, and wrap up with a quick developer FAQ. Section 1. The case for switching. Why are dev teams actually making this move? So what's really fascinating here is how CaptchaAI sizes its pricing model by concurrency rather than just the raw solve count. This is a stark contrast to Anti-Captcha's per solve billing. With Anti-Captcha, if your traffic goes up 10 times, your bill basically goes up 10 times. It's a linear scale. CaptchaAI, however, uses thread-based pricing. Think of a thread as simply one in-flight CAPTCHA. You pay for that concurrent thread capacity, and you get unlimited solves per thread each month. To put that into perspective, this comparison brilliantly illustrates the massive difference at high volume. Based on the source data, let's look at 1 million reCAPTCHA v2 solves per month. On Anti-Captcha's linear per solve model, that's going to run you about $1,800. But on CaptchaAI's advanced plan, which gives you 50 flat threads, it's only about $90. At steady high volumes, your effective cost per solve on a thread-based model just drops off a cliff, whereas a linear model keeps scaling costs right alongside your traffic. Beyond just the cost, there's the whole capability factor. CaptchaAI boasts massive coverage, including over 27,500 image and OCR types. But what really drives developers to compare the two is the modern CAPTCHA stack. CaptchaAI covers full-page Cloudflare challenges that return a clearance cookie, BLS multi-image CAPTCHAs for things like visa portals, and custom grid selects. According to our source material, Anti-Captcha doesn't offer equivalents for those specific, highly complex types. Now, to frame this completely neutrally, both absolutely have distinct strengths. Anti-Captcha is often the tool of choice if your top priority is raw, standard latency. They generally offer faster best-case solve times on standard reCAPTCHA, clocking in around 15 to 25 seconds, and they do support GTest v4. CaptchaAI is positioned more for broader, modern coverage, predictable flat pricing at scale, and crucially, it lets you actually test your targets with a free trial first before committing a single dime. Moving on to Section 2, Core API Differences. We're talking REST versus JSON. I really want to emphasize that this whole migration is primarily just a shift in how you format your requests. Anti-Captcha relies on JSON task objects that you physically have to construct and send. CaptchaAI dramatically simplifies this by using plain REST get and post query parameters. It is a much flatter, simpler structure. You're completely ditching the JSON bodies and moving to straight REST query parameters. This makes it incredibly easy to test a call right from your browser or just by using curl. Section 3, the practical migration checklist. Let's get into the step-by-step action plan. Okay, so the absolute crucial point here is following these 4 macro steps to mitigate your risk before you ever touch your live production traffic. First, map your fields and endpoints. Second, validate everything using CaptchaAI's free trial. Third, run both providers in parallel. And fourth, evaluate your real downstream workflow acceptance. Let's break down exactly what that first mapping step looks like. Here's exactly what you'll be mapping in your code. Since CaptchaAI doesn't emulate Anti-Captcha's JSON format, you're going to update your endpoints. Create task simply becomes in.php, and get task result becomes res.php action equals get. As for the parameters, website key maps over to Google key, and website URL maps to page URL. And finally, instead of parsing a complex JSON object looking for solution.gReCAPTCHA response, you just parse the single REST response field that CaptchaAI returns. Really, it's just a quick translation job. Section 4, Common Migration Mistakes. Let's talk about the traps and pitfalls you definitely want to avoid. I want to drive home this incredibly critical insight. Getting a CAPTCHA token back from the solver is not the finish line. Honestly, a token is completely useless if the target site rejects it. Real success is downstream workflow acceptance. You absolutely must measure whether the token actually allowed your automation to proceed, not just whether the solver API spit back a string of characters. Here's another massive mistake: the hard cutover. Please do not move all your production traffic immediately. The source material heavily emphasizes leveraging CaptchaAI's 3-day free trial, so use it. Point your solver at an authorized, low-risk target first to safely test the integration before you blindly cut over your entire revenue-generating pipeline. Let's quickly run through a few other common developer mistakes to make sure your newly mapped code actually performs correctly. Don't treat this as a full workflow rebuild. Again, it's just an endpoint update. Don't compare providers solely on best-case solve speed while totally ignoring modern coverage like Cloudflare or BLS, especially if your targets actually use them. And critically, this happens all the time. When you apply the solved token, do not forget to preserve your session context like cookies and user agents. Otherwise, the target site will flag the mismatch and just reject the token anyway. Finally, Section 5, Quick Developer FAQ. Let's hit some rapid-fire questions. A super common question we see regarding dual solver setups is, can I run both services together during the migration, or even keep them both as a failover strategy afterward? The short answer? Absolutely yes. In fact, running a parallel setup with a simple try-catch wrapper is highly recommended. It is literally the safest way to validate the migration. You can run both solvers on the exact same workload, compare their actual workflow acceptance rates and latencies side by side on your real targets, and smoothly fall back if needed before making a 100% switch. Next up, the inevitable latency question every single developer wants answered. Which provider is actually faster? To give you an impartial comparison straight from the source data, Anti-Captcha wins on standard raw speed, often returning best-case solve times of 15 to 25 seconds on standard reCAPTCHA. CaptchaAI, meanwhile, generally solves under 60 seconds. However, CaptchaAI focuses heavily on consistent solving and offers free retries on failed solves automatically, whereas Anti-Captcha does not. So you kind of have to weigh raw best-case latency against broader coverage and those free retries. I want to leave you with this one final provocative thought. The capabilities, pricing, and speeds of these providers are always evolving. Don't just take a spec sheet at face value. Will the solver actually work for your specific, unique pipeline? The only way to truly know is to test it yourself. Map your fields, use that free trial, run them in parallel, and verify the current performance on your own authorized targets before ever relying on them in production. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and happy building.